invite you to welcome our panel onto the stage. Ladies and gents, welcome on board Ian Funnell from ABB, Martin Pibworth of SSE, and Richard Hughes of EDF. Have a seat, gentlemen. Make sure. Can we get another glass of water? Lovely. You should have some water there. Now, you may have seen the graphic was slightly misleading. This is not Beatrice. Could you explain the situation, please, for us, Richard? Unfortunately.
I'm Richard Hughes. I'm the Sales Marketing Director for EDF Energy. Unfortunately, Beatrice has been called away at the last minute for a family matter, so you get me instead. So
it was at last minute, but he's a great replacement. And apologies from Neil Clitheroe from Scottish Power. Same issue there. So, but we've got a great panel. Gentlemen, thank you. Welcome. What I'd like to do is just get your first reactions to what you just heard from the Minister. Let's start with you, Ian.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So my name is Ian Funnell. I'm the Managing Director of ABB in the UK. I think there's probably three things that struck me as being relevant and important. One, the Minister mentioned the level of innovation in the UK and as being the UK being a leading country in that sense. ABB covers over 100 countries worldwide, and we see that. We see the UK as being probably one of the top 3 or 5 countries worldwide where that level of innovation in energy is prevalent. I think the second thing is business energy efficiency.
Yeah.
I think that's an extremely important piece. We talk about energy efficiency a lot. But I really wonder whether businesses understand where energy is being used and what steps they can actually take to minimize their current energy consumption. I think that there is so much technology out there that enables that to happen, but one really wonders whether everybody understands the component parts where energy is being consumed within their homes or businesses for that matter. And the third point, I think, is data. Data is one of these, we're still moving electrons from A to B. That's whole part of the energy piece. But the level of data available to organizations, either at a local or country level, regional level, is starting to grow immensely. And that in itself is an enabler to develop energy as a service, whether it's peer-to-peer, as was talked about earlier on, or whether it's something different. There are innovators out there now who are looking at business models that are extremely innovative and very disruptive in the energy space based on the data available.
Okay, thank you. Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Minister summed up very well how far we've progressed, actually, over the last few years. I think we sometimes forget that in the complexity of the challenge going ahead. But we are a world leader in renewable technology. We have achieved a significant reduction in emissions. Coal is clearly being phased out in line with government policy by 2025. And also we've been at the forefront of some of the more innovative services and technologies that are coming forward in the markets. So I was struck by that reminder. I was also struck by her recognition of the complexity of the challenge going forward. I think it's good to acknowledge that some of the questions we're all going to have to answer as an industry are not simple questions to answer, and there isn't any kind of silver bullet that's going to magically appear and make everything good for us. But equally, her confidence that the right policy frameworks, the right engagement with industry, the right engagement with you customers will be important to creating the right solutions, I think is incredibly significant. And I guess also, I mean, this is a vastly complex area, and it doesn't matter where you start, whether we're talking about fracking all the way through to kind of big generation or even or data innovation solutions. But I think she recognises correctly that the UK is not only making strides, but is in some senses leading the world in this, and that's got to be good for our industry. So I felt very positive from what she said.
Yeah. Richard.
I really liked the 3 C's and the 1S.
Yes.
I think, you know, while that applies at a UK level, carbon, cost, competitiveness, security, I think it applies at a business level as well. And when we speak to our business customers, I think that combination of things is exactly what they're trying to look at a local level. And I think, coming back to her points about finance, I think that the finance is out there for viable projects. The money is definitely there. The final, I think the tone the Minister was talking about, sort of not just the theory but the practicality, I think that's the kind of gap that not only do we have to look at a national level, but I think each business has to think about as well. We can talk about the theory of flexibility and storage and decentralized generation, but the best step is a step you actually take.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of, I think business is absolutely ready to play its part and to contribute, but I like that air of practicality. The best step is one that you actually take.
Do you all gentlemen, I mean, I asked the room earlier, slightly tongue-in-cheek, is it frightening time in energy?
For me, I think I've been in the energy sector for a long time. This is one of the most exciting periods, I think, one of the most exciting transitions that the energy sector has ever taken. You know, since the advent of so post-industrial revolution, I suppose it is the pace of change.
Why do you think
fantastic.
it's that exciting right now?
Well, if you look at, I mean, some of the things that Martin mentioned, you look at the energy mix now, the need to control that, the use, the challenges, the trilemma, the energy trilemma, trying to square that circle is extremely challenging.
Yeah.
The problems we have are not easy ones, and yet the UK, I think, has done a tremendous job in doing so.
I'm not frightened. I quite liked your Halloween reference at the start, but I'm not frightened. And it seems anodyne and boring to say so, but I'm also excited. But the reason I'm excited is if we go back 10 years and look at some of the problems we were going to have to conquer over the 10 years in front of us, I think largely and broadly we have. And I think some of the strides the industry has taken have been exceptional. And what I see now is an industry framework and a strategic positioning of the UK as an energy provider and as a leader in some of these technologies is very strong. So I'm very excited about the contribution we can all make going forward over the next 10 years. I don't think some of the problems are particularly easy to solve, but I believe in the ingenuity and the technology in the industry to do so.
Richard, scary for EDF? Hinkley? Scary? I had to get that one in.
I think it's scary if you think you're operating by yourself. If you try and do things by yourself when everything is changing so fast, there's so many different avenues. But I think on whatever project, whether it's a huge project like Hinkley or a smaller, energy efficiency project, I think if you try and approach it by yourself, it's scary. But no one has all the answers. That's why we work with partners, with startups, with trusted partners. And I think that's why we try to co-create solutions with our customers. So I think it's scary if you try and go by yourself, but I think if you work with experts, it's not scary.
I'm going to open up to questions in a minute, but for all the guys and girls in the room, the audience here, the business energy audience, they've had to adapt differently. You guys have had to adapt because, frankly, let's put it this way, Hinkley would not be built today, right? There's no way that sort of decision would be made. So for all of you, you closed so many of your coal and gas stations. You've had a massive change in the last 4 to 5 years as an industry. And of course, there's been technological changes for you and who your audience are. Have you guys struggled to have the ability to cope with this change? Because you were built on models that were a big generation down to some. And now we have a completely fractured, innovative, as you said, disruptive model. Has it been difficult?
I mean, just to get to that point, so we have closed one coal station. And you're right. I mean, obviously you've got to be careful about how the company performs and how it looks after its staff, etc., and all of the assets that we are very happy to be responsible for. I think I was just thinking, going back 10 years, I think we had a few wind turbines. We had a hydro business. We had about 4,000 megawatts of coal, and we had about the same in terms of our gas stations. Now we clearly still have a hydro business. We have multiple turbines. We have big offshore wind sites, and we are looking to build a new gas station, which is roughly 10% more efficient than the next most efficient gas station in the UK currently, and probably 15 to 20% more efficient than some of the older gas stations we built. That's all incredibly exciting. That's all very good in terms of emissions, sustainability.
All I'm saying is you've had to change the idea of what your business model was.
But I think, sorry, the point I think I was trying to make is that in all of that, it's very important to have a good, solid policy framework. And we think the capacity mechanism in particular has provided that alongside the ROC regime and the CFD regime. So that has been good to provoke and bring some of this investment forward. And we think that some of the policy frameworks in place on the wholesale side of the business will also induce further change, which is good and positive. And I think all of those things are technologically very good, they're very good from a sustainability perspective and very good from an economic perspective.
Has it been a difficult shift for EDF?
Yes, I think we're having to reinvent ourselves, but we're not the only industry. I should think everyone in the room is in one shape or form having to adapt to digital technologies,
Yeah.
it's having to innovate.
But also that transition from big power to, you know, as you say, more disruptive power, more behind the meter solutions that they're coming to you.
Yeah.
They don't just come to you for power now, they want something different.
But
Don't they?
we see that as one of our critical strengths. You know, the same decision making that we deploy on a huge asset, we then have to use technology to be able to apply that at a large scale to much smaller assets. That's the nature of decentralized supply and flexibility. The same skill set is being industrialized at a much larger scale.
Is it a difficult decision with Hinkley for you guys? Having this thing that perhaps you wouldn't have done now, but you've historically committed to it?
We would and we are. And we would like to do more. It's forced us to innovate both in the Hinkley project and it's forcing us to innovate in all sorts of ways. Technology, financing, and we would like to build more. But again, the next generation requires another step up in innovation. And I think that's the healthy thing about both change, technology and competition. It forces you to be at your best and to invent the next thing.
And briefly, Ian, for your business model, I mean, you know, people are not familiar with ABB. I mean, you probably wouldn't see it in your daily, but it's infrastructure, right? Generally, that's been big kit that you've supplied. Your model has to change with what's happening from your audience here and the end user community, what they want.
And we are a technology innovation company, and if I use the same timescale that that Martin used, if you look at sort of 10 years back, our portfolio now of solutions, particularly in the digital space, is transformational. But we are a technology company. We have to be at the forefront of technology innovation. ABB is the inventor of high voltage AC and DC systems. That's where it started, and that's front and center, remains front and center of this business. But in the last 10 years, the solutions offered to the clients in order for clients like both SSE and EDF to operate are fundamentally different.
And do you look at the audience out there as, because your model, I would have thought, and maybe I'm wrong, would have been big, generators like them, and you're helping them build power stations. But now they want something much smaller. Can someone like you supply that? Can you go down to that sort of level?
We can do systems that cover countrywide, and we could do nano systems that will fit in your home in terms of home automation and everything in between.
So there's a shift in all of your thinking about what the. Can I ask one last question before I go to the audience? Is this shift been one that's been driven by the one thing that none of us can control, which is technology, rather than policy drivers? Or do you think policy drivers that took place, such as the FIT, the whole reform with the Energy Act in 2010, did they pull the levers that have brought this together?
I don't know, actually. I think the policy is clearly set up around resolving the trilemma, and technology has clearly helped do that. If I take an example that I'll be pretty close to, if I think about your average offshore wind turbine and the scale of that and the cost of that compared to even just a few years ago, would that have happened without the policy framework coming in, creating the need for the technology to create a more effective cost base? I suspect one has driven the other, but which way round it is, I'm not sure. And particularly on the digital space, I suspect, I don't know, you're more of an expert, but I suspect technology has probably driven some of the solutions ahead of the policy to an extent. But so I think it's probably different depending on what you're concentrating on.
I think for me, technology is the sort of fuel that drives the change, and regulation and policy are the kind of foot on the accelerator.
Right, gotcha.
And that's where what we need is a kind of a steady foot that doesn't sort of accelerate really fast and then drop off. And what we want is
some sort of resistance.
Clear, consistent environment in which we can invest.
Been running that story for 10 years. Let's have a comment. Right, can we get the house lights up, please? Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to run this for about another half an hour, 40 minutes. So can I have your questions, please, to anyone on the panel? So can you put your hand up a bit more, sir? That's it. We'll get the microphone over there. And again, same thing, if you'd stand up, say who you are and to whom your question is addressed.
Hi, I'm Chris Jenkins. I work for a charity called Thomas Pocklington Trust, and we work with blind and partially sighted people. Okay. I'm visually impaired myself. You probably saw that. It's quite handy for getting attention. Thank you. I'd like to ask the panel about talking smart meters. I believe from kind of some research that they're coming out next year. They're in the later phases of testing. Currently, as a consumer, I'm avoiding the salespeople knocking on my door who want to install meters now. But I've got a good reason, I believe, which is, if preferable, I could have a talking one or a second option would be a high contrast, kind of larger scale fonted one. So I just wondered, have you heard of them? Are your teams working on them? And is that on track to be released next year?
Yeah, absolutely. What are we doing for people who are visually impaired or other people with issues with smart printers?
Well, I'll answer directly. I have heard of them. I think our team is looking at them. I'm not sure how much progress we've made on them, but I'm very happy to guide you. We have a team here today. I'm very happy to guide you to have a conversation with them afterwards, if that's okay. But they have a much more expert view than I will.
Excellent.
Absolutely the same. It's very much on our agenda. One thing I would say is that what we are looking to do is to connect the smart meter to your mobile device. And when I think you can connect the smart meter to the mobile device, it really frees up the technology to much more easily control how you display. You can then obviously have, as you do with a talking assistant, you can then enable voice, much different kinds of display. So
Siri, turn off my kettle.
Well, exactly. That's what you can do.
Right.
Exactly. So,
that'll work.
Precisely. So I think it's one of the key things is to get the smart meter to talk to the phone, because then the technology can be enabled.
Are you guys working on things like that? Are you involved in that?
Not from a metering point of view,
No.
but if you go beyond that, and I was going to just go further into the home,
Yes.
in terms of home automation and all aspects of home automation. So very much part of our portfolio.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Next question. This gentleman here. Can you keep your hand up, sir? Thank you. And please keep our questions short, because we're going to try and get through as many as possible.
Yeah. John Best, founder of EAGER, the East of England Energy Group. Our mantra was the sustainable production and wise use of energy when we set up. I'm concerned sometimes that in business efficiency, which Ian referred to, we always talk about cost, reducing the cost.
Yeah.
Can we have a better conversation that talks about the value?
Interesting.
Great point. I subscribe to that entirely. And I think that there's a lot of our customers in this room today, the ones that are cost-driven, I think, ignore value. We are an organization that try and look at whole life cost. No, we don't try. We do look at whole life cost, but it's amazing how many investment decisions are still made on first cost. And if you take a lot of industrial processes with things like motors, the cost of a motor, the capital cost of the motor is 2% of the entire cost, lifetime cost of running the thing. So first cost is not the best, as an example.
Completely agree. I mean, the way we try to think about it is circular thinking in the circular economy. And I think absolutely that's taking whole life all the way through. So yeah, completely agree. A nice example of that is one that we're working with Nissan on, taking second life batteries, using them to support the grid, to reduce carbon on the grid, supporting the second-hand cost of a vehicle, encouraging more people to buy vehicles. So a great example of how you can really close the loop and not just look at short-term costs.
Aren't there budgetary issues, though? I accept what that gentleman said, but for many people, they've got to say, yes, there's a value, and their FD will go, what's it going to cost me? I'm not thinking about I'm just thinking, top line now, is it worth it? And it does come down to cost, even though. How do you address that?
I think there's an element of truth in that.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's also an element of truth that people should be looking for value. And I think probably where my mind went to is there are a lot of things I suspect all of our companies do, and every company in the industry, which looks at not necessarily a realization of economic gain, but look at strategic value and how that translates into a forward market, which none of us, I suspect, would ever claim to be able to prophesy with complete accuracy right now. So there's a lot of money being spent in organizations looking at kind of R&D, future tech solutions, and future kind of digital solutions, which kind of perhaps goes to the value point more than the return points. So I think that's done to an extent. There is obviously always that challenge. Of course there is. That's part of being in business.
We get that a lot from our audience.
Yeah.
I've got a good idea. My FD says no.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that about us, just for clarity.
Does that happen to you as well?
But what, I mean, of course, you kind of build business cases, but business cases for SSE are not necessarily, they will take account of kind of value propositions in the longer term, of course they will.
Okay. Gentleman at the back.
James Williams from North Arts Farmers. Farming is one of many seasonal industries that don't use power consistently throughout the course of the year. Capacity charges are a real killer for the farming industry, and many farmers have actually turned to downgrade the size of their supply and use quite often old diesel generators to take off that peak. What funding could be given, and what initiative and innovative ideas could help the non-consistent energy use?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Who wants to take that?
I can have a go. I mean, I think it's interesting and very difficult.
Yeah.
So, I think the capacity charging debate, as far as I'm aware, has been going on for as long as I've been in the industry, actually, which is about 20 odd years. It's kind of to and fro, as you know, quite a lot. There are, I believe, a number of industry consultations going on that, and I've no idea where they're about to land. I accept it's kind of a difficult issue, and I kind of understand from an agricultural perspective exactly what you're saying. I don't think anybody... Well,
but isn't that the situation? Because I can't remember, but for many farmers we've had stories where they've turned to having wind farms and things like that, yeah, for that, because of that reason, to give themselves power, rather than having to, ironically, a green industry, can't get much greener than farming, using diesel generators.
Yeah, I guess where I was going to go with this is there are obviously a bunch of behind-the-meter solutions which aren't necessarily diesel, and of course companies like mine would happily talk to you about some of those things and what we can do with you in terms of building some kind of capability which helps with that, which isn't perhaps diesel.
Yeah. Not a pitch, though. No.
Not a
right,
pitch.
okay. Richard.
I think this is where regulation needs to be innovative as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And it needs to sort of, particularly around capacity, we have something that was designed for a very centralised system, yeah, and we need to be innovative and forward-thinking to make sure that the mechanisms support the right kind of investments in the right places. I would say the thing that we have to be careful, whenever you're making an investment, it's inevitably outside of a regulatory and a political cycle. So you need to be hedging your bets across multiple revenue sources so that you're not absolutely dependent on a short-term quirk of a mechanism that may ultimately get ironed out.
Right, okay. Anything you want to say about that?
I just think from a connectivity point of view, if you think about you're connected to the grid, you've got a diesel generator. I don't know what else is there. Is there solar? Is there wind? Is there capability there? But also energy storage as well. For at least for those periods where you can perhaps manage that and the controllability of all that. So I mean that from a technology point of view, it exists. Yeah. For sure.
Next question. Can we have that lady there? Give your hand up. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Francesca Aldunson with LSE Energy Society, and I'm interested in knowing more about how energy companies are starting to invest more in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we're seeing how BP acquired Polar Network here in the UK, yeah, Shell acquired New Motion, EDF has the subsidiary Sodatrel. So just interested in hearing more about your points on that. And also, what are the long-term challenges considering the increased load on the grid?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, that thing, before we answer that question, is the biggest change we've seen ourselves in literally, I don't know, such rapid space within 2 years. So, outside our office, we've had a charging point for about 2.5 years. Didn't work for a year and a half. It's working really well. And obviously, there's a Tesla there. Is this the big game changer for you guys? And what are you doing to address what that lady said?
Really interesting topic. Thanks for bringing it up. And it is.
I thought you'd be keen on this one.
It's a huge one for us. ABB are a large manufacturer, one of the world's largest in terms of EV charging solutions. And the one we launched summertime this year will charge 200 kilometers in your car in 8 minutes. That's the level of technology that exists now, partially limited by the vehicles themselves. So there's, from a technology point of view, the technology is there. And I'm thinking now not just cars, but also, delivery vehicles, fleets, buses, yeah, the fleet, the whole piece. And we're in the process of launching a digital advisory group for global large fleet operators, for them to try and help inform the sector as a whole as to where this needs to go in terms of the data to be captured and how you manage the whole piece. So a really, really interesting dynamic. I think there's the other probably two areas. One is fast chargers are one thing, but the world doesn't need fast chargers. So the connectivity to the grid. So these fast chargers are 350 kilowatts. You put a bank of half a dozen there and there's 2 megawatts on the street. And I doubt that these guys could connect 2 megawatts in too many parts of the network. So I think it's the challenge is, and our view is, probably 20% need to be fast chargers, and 80% probably you plug in at your office or your home,
Yeah.
or whatever. And I think the third piece, which is a much more sort of holistic view from an energy point of view, is the question about grid to vehicle and vehicle to grid, and the connectivity of that, and the software and the data that you need to enable that to happen, so that networks don't get overloaded. So everybody drives home, plugs their cars in. Does not mean to say that every car will be charged. The network will determine when those cars are going to be charged, dependent upon network capacity.
So that's fine. You can provide the technology, but for you gentlemen, it's a bloody headache to do that power. So what are you looking at to do this? Because you must be plotting the demand curve of what will happen with EVs.
Well, I mean, let's just take that point. So we had a discussion before we came onto here, and there will be a range of views about how many electric vehicles will be in by 2030, and that range will probably be pretty big. My own personal view is this is a trend that will accelerate perhaps faster than the perhaps base central view. I think for us it's a response in terms of flexibility, and it's a response in terms of moving energy into the right places, and there is definitely a lot of thinking going on about how we can offer that flexibility to the market to provide for some of the changes that will occur.
But it's no good him coming up with super fast chargers that you can't do the demand for, can you?
Yeah, but equally you have mechanisms, you have policy frameworks that should pre-see those. So part of the reason for a capacity mechanism is to 4 years in advance predict a demand based upon trends you're seeing on rollouts like EV, and we think that has proved to be a pretty good framework, and can't see why that can't work going forward in the same way. And so and the whole design of that mechanism is clearly to attract the right sort of flexibility on load, and then National Grid clearly have a role to play in procuring flexible services. We have a bunch of generation flexibility. We have invested in flexibility significantly over the last 5 to 10 years with new hydro, this new Keadby 2, which is a new flexible CCGT we're building. So we are getting ready to respond. I think the challenge will be making sure our predictions of demand forecasts are accurate.
Yes.
And that's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, so again, we're investing in whether it's solar trail and charge points, vehicle to grid via Nuve. The fast charging is expensive, and it's really critical that you get the supply and demand balance right. You have to have the utilization rates. 50% of new vehicles are purchased by businesses for fleets, so it's absolutely critical that businesses make the commitment, understand their own economics and sustainability objectives, and they make the commitment. The new cars drive the used car market, so that's absolutely critical that business is clear on what they're going to do. Half the car, or the majority of times, cars will be spent parked on the road outside your house, parked on your drive if you're lucky enough to have one, or parked at work. So it's really critical that local authorities and businesses think about not only their fleets but their staff parking as well. And I would come back to the point mentioned earlier by the Minister on smart metering, and we will very soon have half-hourly settlement for residential customers, and that will really start to enable the sort of time-of-use tariffs that I think will really drive residential adoption of electric vehicles, and I think that's really critical.
Can I just ask all of you, is this an issue for you, or do you feel that actually this is something that government and the grid needs to sort out far more?
From a technology point of view, I get slightly frustrated. I think there's a lot of good policy statements there.
Yes.
For me, it's about pace. It's about the lack of pace.
Yeah, but you're getting a pace driver from vehicle companies, from energy storage solutions, which is far outstripping what the grid can do.
But yes, but it's about the rollout of the infrastructure into locations.
Yes.
So for example, we talk about this balance of fast chargers versus slow chargers. That there are very few locations where fast chargers are needed. The motorway infrastructure network, for sure, absolutely. People don't want to be standing around for 2 or 3 hours, charging their cars up. So I think it's about the policy decisions to enable that to happen.
Yeah.
That's the thing that sort of frustrates me, because the technology's there.
Yeah, of course. Gentlemen, either of you on whether it's grid or...
Look, I think it's...
You work with grid anyway.
Right, so I mean, there's system operating clearly. I mean, this is just such a big change, which is so unpredictable in terms of when pace really starts to get into it, not least because of the points Ian's just raised. That, I mean, all stakeholders have to work together in this. It has to be government, it has to be grid, it has to clearly be the suppliers, and it has to be the generators. I mean, clearly it will have to work together. And I think the best examples of policy success creating the right changes are when that has occurred. Yeah. So I suspect that's got to be the answer.
Do you want to say anything?
I absolutely agree. It's everybody has to play their part. I would just say that there is a societal issue, again, like we have with broadband and access, where there will be bits of the country and society that aren't necessarily served by pure sort of economics. And I think that's particularly where policy has to make sure that it steps up to the mark.
Okay, next question. Down the front there.
Hi, Tim Hipperson, I'm a consultant. We see the introduction of the domestic price cap. There is a line in the Tory manifesto, I promised to consult on a micro-business price cap, and I wonder if the panel has a view whether that's a good or a bad idea.
I didn't ask the minister about the price cap. I actually dodged that one. Price cap, gents.
So, I think...
Take a breath.
Right. Deep breath. I think that the price cap in residential is necessary for a period, and hopefully it will drive the right kind of change. It will still protect competition and the investments that we've just been talking about for the last 15 minutes. None of that stuff that we've talked about comes for free, whether it's in residential or business. Yeah. So I think it's really important that it creates vibrant competition and maintains investment. And then the same goes, I think, in micro-business. I think there are broader risks with micro-business. It can be sometimes forgotten. We can talk about big business and we can worry about residential. And I think, it was good to hear the minister mention smaller businesses. I think micro-businesses can be forgotten. I do think that technology is starting to catch up now with micro-businesses. I think things like more price transparency will really help. So I don't know if a cap is needed. Hopefully the market itself will provide through technology, through innovation. And I hope that it's not needed as it perhaps is in residential.
Do you think it's needed in residential? I'm surprised to hear you say that.
We were just discussing earlier, the media narrative around the energy industry has been bad for the last decade. It doesn't help any of us, it doesn't help our staff try to get motivated to try and deliver the change that we want to deliver. So if as long as it's set at the right level, if nothing else, if it shifts the narrative onto a more positive one about, more pragmatic steps forward, then it's needed. Yeah.
I know we believe we want a healthy, well-functioning, competitive market. We believe competition, not caps, is probably the answer to that. We have a cap in domestic, so therefore we'll obviously have to play with that and play in that space. I think caps need to kind of take account of current customer needs. They need to ensure healthy competition in the market, and they also need to enable suppliers to honour their licensed obligations. In terms of the micro-business space, I believe it is a competitive space, so therefore I don't see the need for the cap, but that would be our position on the domestic side as well.
Yeah, fine. I won't bother you with that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions over this side of the room? Haven't gone to this side of the room. Blimey, quiet on this side. Anyone else? Got it? Phil, there we go.
Hi, my name's Paul Densham. I've read recently that there's something like 34 suppliers that have failed to pay their renewable obligation bill by the 1st of September, and they've got now a deadline of today to pay it. How many of them are going to fail to pay? And what's going to happen if that takes place?
Okay. Renewable obligations and suppliers. And the vast, huge growth in them.
Yeah, so I don't know those numbers, so I can't confirm those numbers or deny those numbers. Those are new numbers, and I don't know. I'm slightly struggling with that one.
No, fair enough.
We've paid our bill, just to be clear. I think it's, again, we're talking about, are we scared or are we excited?
Well, yeah,
I think, for us, competition is exciting. There are huge numbers of residential competition. It forces us to raise our game, but it has to be a level playing field. We can't have, 30 suppliers given one set of rules when they collectively have, double my market share, let's say. They can't have one set of rules for them and then we're held to a higher standard and a
So for the newer suppliers...
It needs to be a level playing field. And I don't think people should, be allowed to dodge paying things that support carbon reduction.
Okay. Anyone else with anything else? Technology. Gentleman here, and then over there at the back. So if we can just get that. Okay.
Hello, my name is Ali Shazan. I'm a student. It's a different question. I want to know that, as the minister pointed out, that the subsidies in the renewable sector is going down, and maybe the government is planning to abolish the feed-in tariff by the next year. So, what impacts would it have on the residents who want to install renewable facilities on their compound? And will it in any way hinder like the decentralization of power, like the renewable energy?
Okay.
What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing about subsidies going, FITs going down and how it drove all the posh houses in Muswell Hill to stick up solar panels a few years ago. What do you guys think about the sort of subsidy driver now and what it will affect with the resident market? Because many people think the market's now ready to stand on its own. Any views?
Well, I think if you take the renewable market as a whole, and not maybe at a micro level,
yes,
but more at a macro level, I mean, the evidence is absolutely there. The per unit cost of renewable is fantastically dropping, and way quicker, I think, than most expected. So again,
it
technology developments there.
In your view?
Well, it clearly doesn't need support. There are projects being built now that have no support at all. So that and that has not stopped the technology development going even further. And particularly if you look like things like offshore wind, for example. And so that piece has moved without the need for the levels of subsidies that were in place 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, gentlemen. Particularly on the residential side.
Yeah, so on the residential side, there's a million solar panels on residential roofs there or thereabouts. That was a case of foot on the accelerator to get us to that, and now the foot's come off. But I think, so we probably aren't going to see that same kind of continued pace of growth, but there still are plenty of houses in the residential sector, in community housing that can absolutely, has the economics to support solar. I think the other thing is those million solar panels that are already out there, at some point they're going to have to change their inverters. That's why we're looking at solutions like retrofit batteries to spread the cost of replacing an inverter across a new battery. And again, we've talked much today about vehicle to grid and that kind of thing. So I think it's not just about putting new solar panels on residential roofs, it's about really sweating those assets for the benefits of the individuals in the country.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with any of those comments, and I guess kind of looking forward, what are the other technologies that are going to make themselves available behind the meter that will actually induce the sort of changes that solar panels have created, i.e. kind of cleaner energy, lower usage, etc. And I think they're probably the exciting things that we'll probably kind of focus on as an industry over the next few years. And the fact that renewable costs have come down so significantly has got to be a good thing for that.
Yeah. Gentleman there, can we get microphone to him there? Thank you.
Morning, Jason Simpson, Liberty Global, which is the parent company of Virgin Media. So we're a cable TV operator, telco, reasonably large user. When I look at both, whether it be the energy supply side or whether it be the equipment, so to speak, supply side, how are you looking at innovative financing? So once upon a time, we'd get energy, would pay the bill on a monthly basis. It was an OPEX charge, end of story. That all changes when you look at decentralized energy investments in different things like that. Equally, the other way around, when we buy equipment, we'd buy the equipment, we'd pay up front, it's a capital investment and so on. Now that, with the disruption, the change, the fact that corporates are going to take on, more of our own, centralized generation, we might be locked up into PPAs. We're taking a different view on that whole piece. How are you looking at changing the financial models to give us more flexibility how we treat those costs?
Great question. Ian.
Brilliant question. I've not been an energy supplier, but from an equipment perspective, we're working with a number of what I would call disruptors in that space at the moment, where they're looking for technology to enable that to happen. And so the traditional sort of generation, the wholesale through network, through supply link is in the process of being broken. There are the Ubers out there, the sort of energy Ubers, that just trade. There was a discussion earlier. We talked about this peer-to-peer trading and how the system operator is going to be able to react to that. Things like location matters. So how do you value location, whether you're a generator or a user, because that clearly is important from a network point of view. And then how do you use the data? certainly the people that we're dealing with, and we're under NDA, so I'll not share any detail, but they're blending. It's certainly very much energy as a service, but they're blending the data model with physical assets, and that's a really interesting thing. And I think if some of these take off, you'll see a completely different energy landscape in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think I mentioned earlier that the finance is out there for viable projects. There's been plenty of finance for quite a few years, but I would say it's been quite nervous finance. I think what I've seen over the last couple of years is a real maturing of the understanding of many of the existing and new entrants in the finance market. They really understand better the nature of risk, and they're prepared to sign contracts with different levels of risk, whereas maybe initially it was very risk averse. As we see these technologies, whether it's batteries or flexibility, we see the maturing of these markets. People understand the risks that they're taking on, and so we see the money is there for good projects. Again, I reiterate my point about spreading the risk. If you've got all your eggs in one basket, in one form of return, that creates a riskier project. So for projects with well-spread risks, we see the money out there is really maturing and is available.
What is, I mean, I'll answer slightly in a different way. What is really striking is what the customer is asking for now is very different to what it was a few years ago. And this suite of bespoke products the customer requires is much vaster than it has previously been. And we have to obviously respond to that. That's our job. And that doesn't matter whether it's DSR solutions, behind the meter solutions, or corporate PPAs, or flexibility access, or market access, or whatever it may be. And financing is clearly wrapped up in that. And some of these new products are now being offered not just by us, but by the industry clearly. And financing solutions will ultimately should come off the back of that. But I'm not sure necessarily we know completely when or how, but the intent is almost certainly there.
Excellent. Right, we're unfortunately out of time. Can I just ask you, gentlemen, just a final thought? Obviously, Brexit is the biggest thing that's coming up for all of us. What's your feelings on how secure our supply will be for all the ladies and gents in here, for their businesses that they plan forward, and for your own businesses? How are you feeling? Are you looking at the next few months with trepidation, or are you feeling confident regarding the big thing about UK PLC and energy being secure?
So there's the scariest question of the day, I suppose.
So I'd leave it to the end.
It's, I can speak for certainly what we're doing, and we have our contingency plans being developed for the worst case scenario.
Sure.
I mean, you heard the minister this morning, and if you talk to other ministers, they will give you exactly the same level of confidence that a deal will be done. But I can also speak with in relation to a lot of the customers that we deal with about having contingency within the supply chain, so that everybody is ready come 29th of March, whatever happens.
Yeah.
So I think I have a level of confidence that a lot will be secure. Yes. Will everything be secure? It's a very complex thing to unravel, but I think a lot will be secure. So it's probably not as scary as I thought, perhaps.
No, I share that, and I think, I mean, markets obviously have been pretty volatile over the last 6 months. But if you look at kind of market prices in the UK for next year compared to this year, they're actually slightly down. I think the market therefore is signalling there isn't any kind of need for people to be worried about security of supply issues coming off the back of Brexit. Yeah. I guess I kind of believe that the system is robust enough on the power side through the capacity mechanism and through indigenous sources and interconnectors, etc. on the gas side, and of course LNG coming from outside the EU. So I don't have too many fears on that.
Excellent.
The only thing to add, yes, not so worried about the short term, more worried about long-term impacts on skills and innovation, frankly. Yes. I think the market will hopefully sort out the short-term issues.
Excellent. Please, ladies and gentlemen, thank our panel. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.